I'm 31 years old, so I came up kind of in the exact right time for Street Fighter II, World Warrior, Turbo Hyper Fighting. These great games that completely changed the landscape when it came to side-scrolling fighters and gave more or less birth to the entire genre, a rebirth rather. There were games before it that did this, but nothing that did it this well with such interesting characters and bright colors and amazing movesets, just things that we'd never seen before. And such a diverse cast of racial stereotypes. It was amazing. Come on, we've got an Indian guy who his weapon is yoga. He's done so much yoga that he can stretch his arms out to endless proportions. The movie was such an incredible train wreck, and it can't be a secret that I enjoy camp at this point, if you've sat through this long. You've got Raul Julia. Gomez Adams is playing M. Bison in such an incredibly cheesy, almost amateur theater kind of way, where every line is spoken with such aplomb. Everything's spoken with force. Like that. It's amazing. He smiles and just chews the scenery. There are two scenes in this movie in particular that make it for me, at plus one character. And the scenes that make it for me are, first and foremost, there's a scene where Bison, who is the head of the Shadowloo, and Bison attempts to pay for weapons from Sagat with money that has his face on them. And he says, every Bison dollar will be worth 5 British pounds, something like that. And this is a guy who is so clearly, he swallows his own bullshit just so brilliantly. He really believes it, and I think that's one of the things that makes a great villain. The second scene that makes this movie to me is, there's a scene where Zangief, the Russian bear wrestler, who is played brilliantly in this movie as sort of the dumb muscle. Then you've got E. Honda, he's really nobody. He's a badass sumo wrestler. That's really all there is to him. But they get into a wrestling match of sorts that ends up being kind of a collar and elbow tie-up, shoving around concept. And they're shoving each other around a model city that's in the Shadowloo base for some reason. They're doing the shoving match. There's sound effects from Godzilla playing, and it's so hilarious to me. And I don't, partially because I like those kaiju movies, but also partially just because it's a non sequitur in a movie that is itself a non sequitur. It makes me laugh every single time, and that's one of the things that works for me. The other thing that makes the movie work to me is the character of Vega, who is probably the closest to his video game counterpart. He's an agile ninja guy who fights with a claw and wears a mask because he's a narcissist. He's a very handsome guy. And it's nothing that he does, really. It's just that he exists sort of makes me happy. But yeah, it's a terrible movie, again, in a lot of ways. But like most of the movies that you'll see on my list of movies I like that everyone else hates, it's dumb, but the level of camp just makes it entertaining to me. You just turn off the brain and watch it for a while and just let it go. Just let it go and laugh, because I think that's the way to do it. Number two. Last Action Hero. I love this movie. I love every stupid, corny, overblown, cliched, self-absorbed second of this. Everything about it is a send-up. This is not a secret to anybody, but it's all a send-up of all the action movie cliches. And part of what makes it work to me is that it's very self-aware in that a lot of people had a problem with sort of how cliche the movie was, but if it wasn't cliche, it wouldn't have worked for me, because most of what made it funny, and it was never like laugh out loud, like, fall out of your chair funny, but it was consistently amusing. To quickly recap the plot, A young boy is transported into the world of action movies he so dearly loves by a magical ticket and must find a way to return home. Alright, very basic. The movie that he's transported into, after this strange, dark scene where the kid is by himself in an apartment and is robbed, in a very dark, scary situation, and then he ends up in this movie later, which is bright and colorful, and people are taking bullets and they're surviving, and everything is blowing up. Arnold Schwarzenegger is driving a car with his butt cheeks at one point. Part of that sort of contrast that makes the movie world so lighthearted and fun, even though people are clearly dying in this, is that the real world comes across as dark, terrifying. Schwarzenegger and the kid go to the house where the sort of propped up bad guy is. He's a mob boss of some sort of Vivaldi, I believe is his name. They go to the house and they're met at the door by their enforcer. The scene is, he brings out attack dogs and says something like, "Make no mistake, they are very well trained." And he snaps his fingers, and the dogs, when you look back at them, are standing in a kind of a canine pyramid, and it's so stupid, but it's funny. And the scene when Arnold Schwarzenegger's character finds out he's in a movie, his character's name is Jack Slater. When Slater finds out that he's a movie character, he is destroyed. Imagine finding that out, that you were someone else's creation, that you didn't exist, really, except for on cellophane. Cellophane at the time, everything's digital now, I suppose, but imagine how crushing that would be to make that discovery, and it's another moment of incredible levity in what is otherwise a very funny movie. Hi everyone, so you can see, based on the beard, this is being added a little later than the other 5 choices for movies I like that I think everybody else hates, in part because my initial choice was The Spirit, with Samuel L. Jackson, Scarlett Johansson, and no one else that I can remember. I remember that I liked the movie a lot. It was fun, and I also remember that it got some really poor ratings, but, you know, I feel like not remembering the movie very well is a reason not to add it onto a list like this. So I'm going to go instead with my other choice, which was The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. It came out in 2003. The movie actually has kind of a high rating, and was apparently nominated for 4 Oscars. Who knew? But I've noticed that there's a lot of critical flack surrounding it for being another entry into the Dances of Wolves Avatar sort of subgenre of white guy gets kidnapped in a foreign land, ends up identifying with foreigners, turns against his people. But there's a lot about the movie that I like anyway. Tom Cruise is a guy that, you know, he gets a lot of criticism for some of his insanely over-the-top performances, but there are several movies that he really works for me in. One of them, actually the movie that he works for me the best probably is Collateral. If you haven't seen that movie, you're doing yourself a tremendous disservice. Go watch Collateral. In fact, do it right now. I'll wait. Okay, I'm assuming you didn't watch Collateral in that time frame. If you did, congratulations, you're amazing. Anyway, The Last Samurai is one of the other movies that it works for me. The Meiji era represented another paradigm shift in which the Japanese sword became less of a force for change and more of a symbol of what used to be. Although Tom Cruise's character, the erstwhile white guy, is there and he's the main character, to me the main character of this movie is Japan itself and the samurai class that is over at this point. Tom Cruise plays Nathan Algren, who is a Civil War era soldier, and he takes part in a bloody massacre of a Native American tribe that includes the killing of women and children, and this disillusions him towards his nation and the people that he's been fighting for. He receives an offer to go to Japan to help train the Japanese military in the Western arts of war. Algren reluctantly takes on the duty, but he ends up kidnapped by the forces of one, I believe he's a general, Katsumoto, who is played by Ken Watanabe, who is on my list of people that wherever he is, the movie is instantly better for it. Katsumoto is leading a rebellion of former samurai against the government that he feels has betrayed the emperor. So Algren stays with Katsumoto's people, learns their ways, begrudgingly accepts them as they begrudgingly accept him. You've seen that movie before. The final battle sees the forces of Katsumoto personifying the samurai way of life, not only in that they are dying on the battlefield, fighting for what they believe is the good of the emperor, but also because, much like the samurai way of life, they're the last gasp. The last gasp of their rebellion as they sort of desperately fight, knowing that they're defeated before they even set foot on the battlefield. In the final battle, they fight with surprising vigor, surprising resourcefulness, and they defeat the advance party of the Meiji era. They attack, and they do surprisingly well. They gather all the horsemen, and they ride towards the opposing Meiji forces, who by this point are well equipped. They have firepower, and they use it to great effect, but the samurai continue to advance, just unstoppable. It's like their willpower is all that is keeping this rebellion going, while the sort of manufactured will of the Meiji era falters before them, and that's when the Gatling gun shows up. There's been dramatic music through this whole affair. The sound of blades screams horses winning, but when they bring out the Gatling gun, the Meiji, and they begin to turn it, the soundtrack drops out, and all you hear is the machine gun. And then the screams of horses and men. The weapon is so powerful that it has killed every aspect of their rebellion, and it's killing the last gasp of their lifestyle, their culture. And it's horrifying to watch these people who, even though they're killers, the samurai are killers, it's difficult to, or sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that, but to just watch them be butchered by this single weapon, these 2 wheels and a tube and a belt full of pieces of metal, to watch this defeat, hundreds of years of tactical warfare knowledge and culture with only one man using it, is sobering and painful, and I think it speaks to the impermanence of our lifestyles, not just then, but now, too. The next piece of technology can always change our lifestyles. So to me, The Last Samurai works really well in that we're watching a paradigm shift take place. A culture that survived largely on its own for hundreds and hundreds of years, separated from the world, watching it crumble to dust, and appreciating that what we have can always crumble. And it's how we adapt that allows us to move forward. It's how we adapt that determines whether we will be able to live on, not just as individuals, but also as a society, as a nation, as a world, even as we go further into technology. That is the 6 movies that I like that I think pretty much everyone else seems to hate. Eventually, I'll get better at this video thing, and if you sat through this, I appreciate it. Questions, comments, suggestions, hit me up at admin@thegeekevolved.com. Send me an email. Find me on Twitter, @thegeekevolved. I have a sweet little logo with a G and a gorilla inside of it that doesn't really look like a gorilla, but hit me up, questions, comments, anything like that. Suggestions for lists. We'll do all kinds of lists because people love lists. Any movie you want me to look at, to review, any movie that you disagree with me on. Tell me why you think The Fifth Element is terrible, and tell me why you think that Waterworld is the worst movie that is really, really good. Hit me up, man. I'm all about talking. I'm all about learning new things from people.